The hiking trail was supposed to be peaceful. But when Karen spotted the last drops of water in Sarah's bottle, her entitled demand would unleash a chain of events that would leave one of them fighting for survival and the other discovering that some secrets are buried deeper than mountain graves. What Sarah shared that day would haunt them both forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across Devil's Ridge Trail as Sarah Martinez adjusted her backpack straps and checked her GPS one final time. 6 hours into what was supposed to be an 8-hour solo hike, she was making good time despite the unseasonable heat that had settled over the Colorado mountains like a suffocating blanket. Her water situation wasn't ideal, barely a quarter bottle left when she'd planned to have half, but she'd rationed carefully and knew she could make it to the creek marked on her map in another 90 minutes. The trail ahead wound through a particularly exposed section of granite slabs where the sun would be merciless, but Sarah had done this hike dozens of times. She knew every switchback, every landmark, every potential hazard. What she hadn't counted on was Karen Williamson. The woman appeared around a bend in the trail like a mirage, her designer hiking outfit pristine despite the dust and heat. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was somehow still camera-ready, pulled back in a high ponytail that hadn't shifted despite what should have been hours of hiking. She wore top-of-the-line gear that looked like it had never seen actual use, boots so clean they practically gleamed, a day pack that could have been pulled straight from an array catalog display. Oh, thank God. Karen's voice carried that particular pitch of manufactured distress that immediately set Sarah's teeth on edge. Are you heading back to the trailhead? Sarah paused, studying the woman more carefully. Something was off. Karen's breathing wasn't labored despite claiming to be in distress. Her skin showed no signs of dehydration or heat exhaustion. Most telling of all, she carried no water bottle, no hydration pack, nothing that suggested she'd prepared for even a short hike in these conditions. I'm continuing up the trail, Sarah replied carefully. Are you okay? You look like you might need help. Karen's expression shifted subtly, a flash of irritation quickly masked by renewed desperation. I'm completely out of water. My bottle broke about an hour ago when I dropped my pack. I'm getting really dehydrated, and I think I might pass out if I don't get something to drink soon. Sarah's eyes dropped to Karen's spotless backpack. No wet spots, no signs of a recent water disaster. The lie sat between them like a physical presence. But Sarah had been raised to help people in need, even when those people were obviously lying. There's a creek about an hour and a half ahead, Sarah offered. If you're really in trouble, I can give you a small sip from my bottle, but I don't have much left myself. A sip? Karen's voice rose sharply, the mask of helplessness slipping. I need more than a sip. You've got plenty of water there, and I'm in a medical emergency. Can't just give me a tiny sip and send me on my way. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever someone tried to steamroll her boundaries. She'd dealt with entitled people before in her job as a high school counselor. She encountered parents who demanded special treatment for their precious children on a weekly basis. But out here, miles from civilization, the stakes felt different. I'm sorry, but I've carefully rationed my water for this hike, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. I can spare maybe 2 swallows, but that's it. The creek isn't far if we keep moving. Karen stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the water bottle clipped to Sarah's belt. Listen, I don't think you understand. I'm not asking him, telling you. You need to share that water with me. It's the decent thing to do. I am sharing, Sarah replied, unclipping her bottle. The plastic was sun-warmed and slick with condensation. She unscrewed the cap and held it out. Here, 2 sips. Karen's hand shot out, not to take a polite sip, but to grab the entire bottle. Sarah, caught off guard by the sudden movement, tightened her grip instinctively. For a moment, they stood locked in an absurd tug-of-war over the water bottle, both women pulling with increasing force. Let go, Karen snarled, her carefully constructed facade completely abandoned now. You selfish bitch, you can't hoard water when someone's life is in danger. I'm not hoarding anything, Sarah shot back, her own temper finally flaring. I offered to share, but I'm not giving you my entire water supply. The bottle slipped from both their grasps, sailing through the air in what felt like slow motion. Sarah watched in horror as her carefully rationed water, her lifeline for the remaining hours of the hike, arced through the dry mountain air and struck the granite beside the trail. The impact was a sound like a gunshot in the thin air, plastic exploding against stone. Water splashed across the sun-baked rock, darkening it for a few precious seconds before evaporating into nothing. The broken bottle fragments scattered like shrapnel, some pieces bouncing over the edge of the trail and disappearing into the rocky ravine below. Both women stared at the rapidly disappearing puddle in stunned silence. Look what you did, Karen shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at Sarah. You destroyed the water rather than share it. You're insane. Sarah felt something cold and calculating settled in her chest as she looked at this woman, this perfectly groomed, obviously well-hydrated woman who had just cost both of them their only water source through sheer entitlement and greed. What? I did. Sarah's voice was deadly quiet now. You grabbed my bottle. You caused this. I was dying of thirst. You were going to let me die rather than share your precious water. You're not dying of anything, Sarah said, studying Karen's flushed but healthy complexion, her steady breathing, her bright eyes. "You're not dehydrated. You probably have a car full of supplies parked at some trailhead I don't know about. This is all an act." Karen's expression flickered guilt, anger, and something else Sarah couldn't quite identify. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Sarah stepped closer, and she was pleased to see Karen instinctively back away. "Where's your car parked, Karen? Because I'm betting it's not at the main trailhead where mine is. I'm betting you took the fire road up to the ridge access point, thinking you'd do a quick photo shoot for your Instagram before heading back to your air-conditioned SUV." The accuracy of Sarah's guess was written across Karen's face in stark detail. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the practiced lies failing her for the first time. "That's what I thought," Sarah continued. "You wanted my water not because you needed it, but because you wanted it. Because you're the type of person who thinks everything belongs to you if you want it badly enough." "You can't prove any of that," Karen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I don't need to prove anything to you, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to share something with you, Karen. Something you'll never, ever forget." Karen took another step backward, her designer hiking boots scraping against the granite. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about consequences," Sarah said, pulling her phone from her pocket. The screen showed no signal not unusual at this elevation, but she made a show of checking it anyway. "See, the thing about lying to people is that it only works if they believe you, and the thing about being entitled is that it only works if people are willing to enable you." "I don't know what you're trying to hear is what's going to happen," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying a new authority that made Karen flinch. "You're going to walk back to whatever luxury vehicle is waiting for you at the fire road access. You're going to drink your overpriced bottled water and post your carefully curated photos with some caption about conquering nature or finding yourself on the trail. And every time you do, you're going to remember this moment." "Remember? What moment?" Karen's voice was smaller now, uncertain. Sarah's smile widened. "The moment you learn that not everyone in this world is going to roll over and give you what you want, just because you demand it. The moment you learn that actions have consequences, even out here where you think the rules don't apply." She pulled her GPS device from her pack and made note of their exact coordinates, then took several photos of Karen with her phone's camera, making sure to capture the woman's pristine appearance and obvious state of health. "What are you doing?" Karen demanded, but she made no move to stop Sarah. "Insurance," Sarah replied simply. "See, when I get back to civilization, I'm going to do a little research. I'm going to find out who you are, where you work, what your social media looks like. And if I ever see you pulling this same scam on some other hiker, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are." Karen's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "You can't do that? That's harassment." "It's called accountability," Sarah corrected. "Something you've apparently never experienced before." The two women stood facing each other on the narrow trail, the broken remains of the water bottle glittering in the harsh sunlight between them. The temperature was rising, and Sarah could feel sweat beginning to gather at the small of her back. Without water, the remaining portion of her hike would be challenging, but not impossible. She was experienced enough to know her limits and smart enough to turn back if necessary. Sarah's boots pounded against the granite trail as she raced toward the screaming, her pack bouncing against her spine with each jarring step. The sounds had stopped as abruptly as they'd begun, leaving only the whisper of wind through the pine trees and the harsh rasp of her own breathing in the thin mountain air. She rounded the bend where Karen had disappeared and immediately saw the problem. The trail here curved sharply along the edge of a steep slope, following the natural contour of the mountainside. On the uphill side, granite cliffs rose like ancient sentinels. On the downhill side, loose scree and boulders tumbled away into a ravine that dropped 100 feet before leveling out into a debris field of fallen trees and jagged rocks. The safety barrier 3. Horizontal cables strung between metal posts had been damaged by winter weather and never properly repaired. One of the middle posts leaned at a dangerous angle, its concrete foundation cracked and shifting. The cables sagged, creating a gap large enough for someone to slip through if they weren't careful, or if they were pushed. "Karen," Sarah called out, approaching the damaged barrier cautiously. "Karen, where are you?" A weak voice drifted up from the ravine below. "Down here. I fell. I think my leg is broken." Sarah dropped to her stomach and crawled to the edge, peering down into the rocky chasm. 40 feet below, Karen lay sprawled across a narrow ledge that jutted out from the cliff, face like a broken tooth. Her designer hiking outfit was torn and dirty now, streaked with blood from multiple scrapes and cuts. Her left leg was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly fractured somewhere between the knee and ankle. "Don't move," Sarah shouted down. "I'm going to call for help." She pulled out her phone, already knowing what she'd find. No signal. The mountains were notorious dead zones, and this particular section of trail was shielded by granite walls that blocked even the strongest cell towers. "My phone's not working either," Karen called up, her voice strained with pain. "I already tried. You have to help me." Sarah stared down at the woman who, just minutes earlier, had been demanding her water, grabbing her bottle, causing the very confrontation that had led to this moment. The irony wasn't lost on her. Karen had gotten herself into this situation through her own actions. And now she was once again demanding help from the person she'd just antagonized. But Sarah wasn't the kind of person who could walk away from someone in genuine distress, no matter how they'd gotten there. Okay, Karen, listen to me, Sarah called down. I can see you're hurt, but you're on a stable ledge. How did you fall? Did you slip, or did the barrier give way? There was a long pause before Karen answered. I was trying to get a better look at something. The cable snapped when I leaned on it. Sarah examined the damaged barrier more closely. The cable hadn't snapped, it had simply pulled free from the loose post when weight was applied to it. Karen had probably grabbed it for support and found herself with a handful of useless metal cable as she tumbled over the edge. Are you bleeding anywhere besides the scrapes I can see? Sarah asked. I don't think so, but my leg, ... God, it hurts so much. I think I'm going into shock. Sarah could hear the genuine fear in Karen's voice now, all traces of her earlier entitlement, replaced by raw terror. Whatever else the woman might be, she was genuinely injured and trapped on a ledge with no way to climb back up. I'm going to get help, Sarah said. The ranger station is about 4 hours from here, but I can make it in 3 if I push hard. They'll have radios, medical supplies, rescue equipment. 3 hours. Karen's voice rose to near. You can't leave me here for 3 hours. What if I fall off this ledge? What if I bleed to death? What if Karen? Stop. Sarah's voice cut through the panic. You're not bleeding to death, and that ledge looks solid. But I need you to stay calm and stay still. Don't try to move around or reposition yourself. Don't try to climb up or down. Just stay exactly where you are until help arrives. Please don't leave me, Karen begged. And for the first time since their encounter began, she sounded genuinely vulnerable. I'm scared. I know I was horrible to you before, but please don't leave me here alone. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting against the wave of sympathy that threatened to override her practical judgment. Every minute she spent here was a minute not spent getting professional help. The afternoon heat was building, and without water, her own situation was becoming precarious. But she also couldn't ignore the human being trapped on the ledge below, injured and terrified and completely dependent on her for survival. I'm not going anywhere right now, Sarah said finally. Let me think about this for a minute. She moved back from the edge and examined her options. Her climbing experience was limited to basic rock scrambling, nothing that would qualify her to attempt a technical rescue on a cliff face. She had rope in her pack, 50 feet of static line that she carried for emergency situations, but it wouldn't reach Karen's ledge, and she had no way to anchor it safely even if it did. Her first aid supplies were basic: bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers, an emergency blanket, nothing that would help with a serious fracture or potential internal injuries. What she did have was knowledge of the local trail system and the locations of various emergency resources. The ranger station was the closest option for professional help, but there was another possibility she hadn't mentioned to Karen yet. 3 miles back down the trail, there was an unmarked spur that led to an old mining camp. The camp itself was long abandoned, but the Forest Service maintained an emergency cache, their basic supplies, a satellite communication device, and most importantly, a technical rescue kit that included proper climbing gear. The cache was closer than the ranger station, but accessing it would mean leaving Karen alone for at least 2 hours. And there was no guarantee the equipment would still be there, or that she'd be able to use it effectively even if it was. Karen, Sarah called down. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you hurt anywhere, besides your leg? Any chest pain, difficulty breathing, pain in your abdomen or back? I don't think so, Karen replied. Everything hurts, but the leg is definitely the worst. Why? Because I need to know if you're stable enough for me to leave you for a couple of hours. There's an emergency cache about 3 miles from here. With proper rescue equipment, it's closer than the ranger station, and it might be our best option. You mean leave me here alone on this ledge for 2 hours? I mean get you the help you need instead of sitting here watching you suffer while we both dehydrate in the heat. There was another long pause. When Karen spoke again, her voice was smaller, more subdued. Before, when you said I wasn't really dehydrated, you were right, weren't you? Sarah blinked, surprised by the admission. What do you mean? I mean, I had plenty of water. I have a cooler full of drinks in my car, which is parked exactly where you said it was at the fire road access point. I wasn't in any real danger. I just, ... I wanted your water because mine was warm and yours looked cold, and I thought I could manipulate you into giving it to me. The confession hung in the air between them like a physical weight. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication at having her suspicions confirmed, anger at being lied to and manipulated, and something approaching pity for this woman who had gotten herself into a genuinely dangerous situation through her own selfish actions. Why are you telling me this now? Sarah asked. Because I'm scared, Karen said simply, and because you're the only person who can help me, and I need you to know that I understand how badly I screwed up. I need you to know that I'm sorry. Sarah looked down at Karen's broken form on the ledge below. The woman's expensive hiking outfit was ruined, her perfect hair matted with dirt and blood, her face streaked with tears. All the manufactured superiority and entitled demand had been stripped away, leaving behind someone who was very human and very frightened. "What's your last name, Karen?" Sarah asked. "Williams." "Karen Williamson. And what do you do for work?" Another pause. "I'm a pharmaceutical sales rep. I make good money, drive a nice car, live in a nice house. I'm used to people saying yes to me because I can offer them things they want. But you can't offer me anything right now." "No," Karen said quietly. "Right now I'm just someone who needs help from a stranger I treated terribly." Sarah made her decision. "Karen, I'm going to go get the rescue equipment. It's going to take me about 2 hours round trip. Maybe a little less if I push hard. While I'm gone, I need you to stay absolutely still and try to stay calm. Don't attempt to move or reposition yourself. Don't try to climb up or down. Just wait. What if something happens while you're gone? What if I fall? That ledge has probably been there for thousands of years. It's not going anywhere in the next 2 hours, and you're not going to fall if you don't move around." Sarah began repacking her gear, organizing it for the rapid hike to the emergency cache. As she worked, Karen's voice drifted up from below. "Why are you helping me? After what I did to you? After I caused us to lose all our water? After I lied to you? Why aren't you just walking away?" Sarah paused in her packing, considering the question. The honest answer was complicated: part moral obligation, part professional training, part stubborn refusal to let Karen's bad behavior dictate her own actions. "Because this is who I am," she said. Sarah's finger hovered over the satellite phone's emergency button as Karen's words echoed up from the ravine. The sun beat down mercilessly on her exposed position at the cliff's edge, and she could feel precious moisture evaporating from her skin with each passing second. "Help you disappear," Sarah called down, stalling for time while she tried to process what was happening. "What are you talking about? It's really quite simple." Karen's voice drifted up, maddeningly calm and confident. "See, Sarah, I've gotten myself into a bit of trouble back in the real world. The kind of trouble that involves federal investigators asking uncomfortable questions about pharmaceutical samples that went missing from my company's inventory. The kind of trouble that involves clients who paid good money for products they never received." Sarah felt her blood chill despite the heat. "You're talking about drug theft. Such an ugly term. I prefer to think of it as ... redistribution, taking expensive medications from people who could afford them anyway and selling them to people who needed them but couldn't pay full price. I was practically a humanitarian, and now you're running from the law." Running is such a dramatic word. I prefer strategically relocating. But yes, there are some people who would very much like to have a conversation with me. People who might not be entirely sympathetic to my humanitarian efforts. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand Karen's plan. The woman had clearly orchestrated this entire encounter, from the initial confrontation over water to the staged fall. But what was her endgame? "So, you fake your own death," Sarah said slowly. "Make it look like you fell while hiking. But you need a witness to make it believable." "Very good." Karen's voice carried a note of genuine approval. "I knew you were smart. That's exactly what I need someone to tell the authorities that poor Karen Williamson fell to her tragic death while hiking alone. Someone credible, someone with no obvious motive to lie. Except I know the truth now. Do you?" Karen's laughter echoed off the granite walls. "What truth is that, exactly? That I grabbed your water bottle and we both lost our supply? That I fell through a damaged safety barrier? That you heroically attempted a rescue but arrived too late to save me?" Sarah's grip tightened on the satellite phone. "That's not what happened, isn't it? Think about it, Sarah. What evidence is there of anything else? You're the only witness, and your story, the true story, makes you look pretty suspicious. You had a confrontation with a woman, she ended up dead, and you conveniently happened to be the one who found her body." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Karen was right from an outside perspective. Sarah's story would sound like the desperate lies of someone trying to cover up a crime. A high school counselor pushed to her breaking point by an entitled stranger, striking out in anger, then creating an elaborate cover story to hide her actions. "No one would believe that," Sarah said, but even as she spoke the words, she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "Wouldn't they? Let's see. You're out here hiking alone? No witnesses to your whereabouts. You encounter a woman who makes you angry enough to get into a physical altercation over water. The woman ends up dead under suspicious circumstances, and your explanation is that she was actually a pharmaceutical thief who faked her own death as part of an elaborate escape plan." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the trap closing around her with inexorable precision. Karen had planned this perfectly, creating a scenario where the truth sounded like obvious fiction while her fabricated story had the ring of plausible tragedy. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked. "I want you to make that call to Ranger Martinez. I want you to report that you returned to find me gone from the ledge, that you searched the area and found evidence I had fallen further down into the ravine. I want you to be appropriately distraught about your failed rescue attempt. And then what? Then you hike out of here, go home, and forget this ever happened." In a few days, when my body isn't found, despite extensive search efforts, the case will be closed as an accidental death. Karen Williamson will be officially dead, and I'll be free to start over somewhere else with a new identity. Sarah stared down into the shadowy depths of the ravine, trying to spot Karen's location. The woman's voice seemed to come from multiple directions, echoing off the rock walls in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint her exact position. How do I know you won't just disappear and leave me to face murder charges when your body never turns up? Because that wouldn't serve my purposes. Karen replied. I need there to be a credible witness to my death. I need someone the authorities will believe. Killing you or framing you for murder would just create more problems and more investigation. No, Sarah, I need you alive and free and telling your story. The story you want me to tell. The story that serves both our interests. You avoid suspicion of murder, and I get my fresh start. Everyone wins. Sarah's finger moved toward the phone's dial pad, then stopped. Something in Karen's tone, some subtle shift in inflection, suggested the woman wasn't telling the complete truth. There was another layer to this plan, something Karen wasn't revealing. What happens if I refuse? Sarah asked. The silence that followed was long enough that Sarah began to wonder if Karen had moved out of earshot. When the response finally came, it carried a new edge of menace. Let me ask you a question, Sarah. How long do you think you can survive out here without water? The question hit home with brutal accuracy. Sarah's mouth was already cotton dry, and her head pounded with each heartbeat. The afternoon heat was approaching its peak, and she was still hours away from the nearest reliable water source. You're dehydrated too, Sarah pointed out. Karen's laughter drifted up from below. Remember, I told you I had plenty of water in my car. What I didn't mention was that I also cached some supplies along my planned route. There's a nice, cool cave down here with several gallons of water and enough food for days. Sarah felt her stomach drop. You planned all of this, every detail. I've been hiking these trails for weeks, setting up supply caches, studying the terrain, waiting for the right opportunity. When I saw you this morning alone, obviously experienced enough to be credible, but not so experienced that you'd be suspicious of my story, I knew you were perfect. Perfect for what? Perfect to be my unwilling accomplice. See, Sarah, I don't just need a witness to my death. I need a witness who has strong motivation to stick to the story I want told. And nothing motivates people quite like self-preservation. Sarah's blood ran cold as she began to understand the true scope of Karen's plan. This wasn't just about faking a death, it was about creating a scenario where Sarah would be so deeply implicated that she'd have no choice but to maintain the lie forever. You're going to frame me, Sarah said. Frame is such an unpleasant word. I prefer to think of it as ... insurance. You see? I'm going to leave behind just enough evidence to suggest that maybe, just maybe, you weren't entirely truthful about what happened here today. Nothing conclusive enough to convict you, but enough to ensure that if you ever decide to change your story, the authorities will take a very close look at your role in my disappearance. Sarah's hands were shaking now. Whether from low blood sugar, dehydration, or pure fear, she couldn't tell. What kind of evidence? Oh, just little things. Some of your hair on the rocks where I supposedly fell, maybe a few drops of your blood, to suggest you were injured in a struggle, perhaps some torn fabric from your clothing caught on the damaged barrier, the kind of evidence that forensic investigators love to piece together into compelling narratives. You can't do that. You don't have my Sarah's words cut off as she realized what Karen had been doing during the 2 hours she'd been gone. The woman hadn't been trapped helplessly on a ledge. She'd been planting evidence, staging a crime scene, creating the physical proof needed to support whatever story would best serve her purposes. I'm afraid I can, and I have, Karen said, confirming Sarah's worst fears. So you see, Sarah, you really don't have a choice. You're going to call Ranger Martinez and report my tragic accidental death because the alternative is spending the rest of your life under suspicion of murder. Sarah looked at the satellite phone in her trembling hands. The device that was supposed to be her lifeline had become the instrument of her downfall. Whatever call she made now, whatever story she told, would determine not just Karen's fate, but her own. I won't do it, Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I won't help you escape justice, and I won't lie to cover up your crimes, even if it means facing murder charges yourself. Even then, the silence that followed was deeper and more ominous than any that had come before. When Karen spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of friendliness or manipulation. It was cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy. Then, I'm afraid, Sarah, that we have a problem. You see, I really do need that witness testimony, and if you won't provide it willingly, ... The implications hung in the air like a physical threat. Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that she was no longer dealing with a con artist or a drug thief. She was dealing with someone who was prepared to commit murder to protect her elaborate escape plan, and Sarah was alone on a mountain with no water, no backup, and no way to call for help without playing directly into Karen's hands. The trap had. Sarah's legs burned as she pushed down the main trail at a pace that bordered on reckless. Without water, every step felt like a negotiation with her body, her mouth growing increasingly dry, her head beginning to pound with the first whispers of dehydration. The sun had reached its zenith, turning the exposed granite sections of the trail into a furnace that radiated heat in shimmering waves. She forced herself to maintain a steady rhythm, counting steps to keep her mind occupied. 100 steps. Breathe. 200 steps. Check her GPS. 300 steps. Resist the urge to look back toward where Karen lay trapped and helpless on her rocky ledge. The spur trail to the old mining camp was barely visible, just a faint depression in the forest floor marked by a weathered wooden post with no signage. Sarah had only been here once before, during a training exercise with the local search and rescue team 2 years ago. She prayed her memory was accurate and that the emergency cache hadn't been moved or vandalized in the intervening time. The abandoned trail wound through dense stands of lodgepole, pine, and aspen, their canopy providing blessed relief from the relentless sun. Here, in the dappled shadows, Sarah could almost forget the urgency of her mission, almost forget the woman depending on her for survival, almost forget that her own situation was becoming more precarious with each passing minute. But the peace was deceptive. This trail hadn't been maintained in years, and it showed. Fallen trees blocked the path in multiple places, forcing Sarah to climb over or crawl under obstacles that sapped her energy and slowed her progress. Loose rocks shifted treacherously underfoot, threatening to send her tumbling into the same kind of fall that had trapped Karen. After 45 minutes of grueling hiking, Sarah emerged into the clearing that housed the remains of the Silver Bell mine camp. The site was a graveyard of industrial ambition-rusted machinery scattered among collapsed wooden structures, mine shafts sealed with concrete and warning signs, tailings piles slowly being reclaimed by hardy mountain vegetation. The emergency cache was supposed to be housed in the old mine superintendent's office, the only building that remained structurally sound. Sarah approached the weathered wooden structure with growing apprehension. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and several windows were broken. It looked like it had been years since anyone official had visited this place. She pushed open the door and stepped into the musty interior. Sunlight streaming through the broken windows illuminated a single room filled with deborrowed furniture, scattered papers, empty beer cans left by teenage trespassers. In the far corner, beneath a tarp green with mildew, she found what she was looking for. The emergency cache was housed in a military surplus aluminum case, secured with a combination lock. The numbers were standard for all Forest Service emergency supplies. The date of the Wilderness Act, the 3rd of September '64. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she worked the combination. Whether from excitement or the early stages of heat exhaustion, she couldn't tell. The lock clicked open, and Sarah lifted the heavy lid. Inside, carefully organized in foam compartments, was everything she'd hoped to find: a technical climbing harness, dynamic rope rated for rescue operations, a system of pulleys and anchors designed for cliff rescues, an emergency medical kit far more comprehensive than her basic first aid supplies, and most importantly, a satellite communication device. Sarah pulled out the sat phone first, powering it on and waiting anxiously for it to establish a connection. The device chirped to life, showing 2 bars of signal strength. Not great, but enough to make a call. She dialed the emergency number for the local ranger station, her heart pounding as the connection established. Rocky Mountain National Forest. Emergency Services. This is Ranger Martinez. This is Sarah Martinez, no relation. Sarah said quickly. I'm reporting a hiking accident on Devil's Ridge Trail. I have an injured party trapped on a ledge, approximately 40 feet down from the main trail. Probable leg fracture, possible other injuries. GPS coordinates are. She rattled off the location from her GPS device. Copy that, Ms. Martinez. Are you trained in technical rescue operations? Sarah hesitated. Her certification was basic at best, more theoretical than practical. I have some training. I'm at the Silver Bell emergency cache now, and I have access to proper equipment. Negative on attempting a solo technical rescue, Ranger Martinez said firmly. The conditions are too dangerous, and we can't risk having 2 victims instead of 1. We're dispatching a helicopter rescue team now. ETA is approximately 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Sarah's voice rose. The victim has been exposed without water for over an hour already, and the temperature is climbing. She could be in serious trouble by then. I understand your concern, but standard protocol, Ranger Martinez. Sarah interrupted. I need you to understand something. The victim caused both of us to lose our water supply through her own actions. She's not just dehydrated, she's been lying on granite, in direct sunlight, with no shade and no fluids. 90 more minutes could be the difference between a rescue and a recovery. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Martinez, are you saying this was not an accidental fall? Sarah realized she was treading into dangerous territory. How could she explain Karen's behavior without making it sound like she herself might be responsible for what happened? It was an accident, she said carefully, but it was an accident that occurred because the victim was acting recklessly after a confrontation over water resources. She grabbed my water bottle, causing both of us to lose our entire supply. Then she stormed off and fell through a damaged safety barrier. I see. And where are you now in relation to the victim? I'm about 3 miles away at the emergency cache. I left her on the ledge to come get proper rescue equipment. Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Martinez, I need to ask you directly. Do you feel confident in your ability to perform a safe rescue operation with the equipment available to you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah knew what the ranger was really asking. Was she willing to risk her own life to save someone who had created this entire situation through selfishness and poor judgment? The answer should have been simple. Wait for professional help. Follow protocol. Don't risk making the situation worse. But Sarah also knew that every minute Karen spent on that exposed ledge without water was a minute closer to serious heat-related illness. The woman might have brought this on herself, but she didn't deserve to die for it. I think I can do it, Sarah said finally. The equipment here is standard rescue gear, and the approach to the ledge doesn't look technically difficult. It's more of a controlled descent than a true technical climb. If you attempt this rescue, you'll be acting outside official and assuming full responsibility for the outcome. Do you understand that? I understand. Then good luck, Miss Martinez. Maintain contact on this frequency if possible. The helicopter team will be standing by in case you need backup. Sarah ended the call and began organizing the rescue equipment. The climbing harness fit reasonably well, though it was designed for a larger person. The rope was 60 meters of dynamic climbing line, more than enough to reach Karen's ledge with plenty to spare. The pulley system would allow her to raise Karen back to the trail level without requiring superhuman strength, but as Sarah packed the gear and prepared for the hike back to the rescue site, she couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Something about Karen's story didn't add up. The woman had claimed to be trying to get a better look at something when she fell, but there was nothing particularly interesting visible from that section of trail. No scenic overlooks, no wildlife, no geological features worth investigating. What had Karen really been doing when she went over the edge? Sarah shouldered the heavy pack of rescue equipment and began the return journey. Pushing through her growing fatigue and dehydration, the weight of the gear made the climb back to the main trail even more punishing, and she had to stop frequently to rest and check her bearings. By the time she reached the junction with Devil's Ridge Trail, her head was pounding and her vision had begun to blur slightly around the edges. She was experiencing the early stages of heat exhaustion herself, but she couldn't afford to stop now. Karen had been on that ledge for nearly 2 hours without water or shade. As Sarah approached the site of the accident, she called out to announce her return. Karen, I'm back with the rescue equipment. No response. Karen, Sarah called louder, breaking into a stumbling run toward the damaged barrier. Can you hear me? She dropped to her knees at the edge of the cliff and peered down at the ledge where she'd left Karen. The ledge was empty. Sarah blinked hard, wondering if dehydration was affecting her vision. But no, the narrow shelf of rock was clearly visible, and there was no sign of Karen anywhere on it. No body, no blood, no torn clothing. Caught on the rocks, it was as if Karen Williamson had simply vanished. Karen, Sarah screamed, her voice echoing off the granite walls of the ravine. Where are you? From somewhere far below, faint but unmistakably real, came the sound of someone laughing. The sound sent ice through Sarah's veins, despite the blazing heat. It wasn't the laugh of someone in pain or distress. It was the laugh of someone who had just pulled off an elaborate joke. As the implications of what she was hearing began to sink in, Sarah's finger stabbed the emergency button on the satellite phone before Karen could say another word. The device chirped as it connected, but instead of Ranger Martinez's voice, she heard only static punctuated by brief bursts of electronic interference. Hello, hello, Sarah spoke urgently into the device. This is Sarah Martinez. I need immediate assistance. More static. The signal bars on the phone's display flickered between 1 and 0. The connection degrading, even as she watched. Having trouble with your phone, Sarah? Karen's voice drifted up from the ravine, tinged with dark amusement. That's unfortunate, though. I should mention I found something interesting while you were gone. A little device hidden in the rocks. Down here, very high-tech looking. Almost like the kind of signal jammer someone might use if they wanted to ensure private conversations stayed private. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The emergency cache. Of course there would be communication, equipment stored with the rescue gear, and of course Karen would have found a way to access it during her supposed captivity. You can't jam satellite signals, Sarah said, but even as she spoke, she watched the phone's display go completely dark. You'd be surprised what's possible when you plan ahead, Karen replied. I've had weeks to prepare for this, Sarah, weeks. To study this location, to plant the equipment I needed, to eliminate variables that might complicate my plan. Sarah pocketed the useless phone and tried to think. Without communication, her options were limited to immediate physical action. She could attempt the technical rescue she'd originally planned, try to reach Karen and overpower a woman who had demonstrated she was willing to commit murder, try to reason with someone who had orchestrated an elaborate criminal conspiracy, or she could run, leave Karen in the ravine and try to make it to the ranger station on foot. It would mean abandoning someone to die, even someone who had threatened her life, but it might be her only chance of survival. I know what you're thinking, Karen called up. You're wondering if you can make it to help before you collapse from dehydration. You're wondering if leaving me here to die makes you a murderer? or if staying makes you a victim. Sarah moved away from the cliff edge, positioning herself behind a large boulder that would provide cover if Karen had somehow armed herself. The woman's voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions now, suggesting she was moving around in the ravine below. Here's what you're not thinking about, Karen continued. You're not thinking about the fact that I've been planning this for months. You're not thinking about the supply caches I mentioned, or the escape routes I've mapped out, or the backup plans I've put in place. A chill ran down Sarah's spine despite the blazing heat. What backup plans? Well, for instance, did you really think I was working alone? Did you think someone planning to disappear forever wouldn't have assistance from people with experience in these matters? Sarah's mind raced. If Karen had accomplices, if this was part of a larger criminal operation, then everything became exponentially more dangerous. She could be walking into an ambush anywhere along the trail between here and civilization. You're lying, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Tell me, Sarah, when you were at the emergency cache, did you notice any signs that someone else had been there recently? Fresh footprints, perhaps disturbed vegetation, equipment that had been moved? Sarah tried to remember, but her recollection of the cache site was hazy, colored by urgency and stress. She'd been focused entirely on finding the rescue equipment, not on examining the area for signs of other visitors. I thought so, Karen said, apparently reading her silence correctly. You were so focused on playing the hero that you missed the obvious signs. There are people watching this entire area, Sarah, people who are very invested in making sure my plan succeeds. A sound from behind made Sarah spin around, just the wind in the trees, but her nerves were so frayed that every noise seemed like a potential threat. The isolation that had been one of her favorite aspects of mountain hiking now felt like a liability. She was miles from help, surrounded by terrain that could hide any number of threats. So here's what's going to happen, Karen continued, her voice seeming to come from a new location now. You're going to climb down here and help me finish what we started. You're going to assist in staging my death scene properly. And then you're going to hike out of here with a story that satisfies everyone involved. And if I refuse, then my associates will make sure you never leave this mountain alive. And your death will be so obviously accidental that no one will think to look for connections to Karen Williamson's tragic hiking mishap. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think through her increasingly limited options. Every choice seemed to lead to the same inevitable conclusion. Either she became complicit in Karen's scheme, or she died on this remote trail. But there was something about Karen's tone, some subtle desperation beneath the confident threats, that suggested the woman wasn't as in control as she wanted Sarah to believe. If you had backup, Sarah said slowly, if you had people watching the area, then why did you need me to go get the rescue equipment? Why not have your accomplices bring what you needed? The silence that followed was telling. Why stage the elaborate fall at all? Sarah continued, pressing her advantage. If you could just disappear into a new identity, why create all this drama with witnesses and evidence? Because Karen started, then stopped herself. Because you're not running from federal investigators, Sarah said, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. You're running from someone else. Someone who wouldn't be satisfied with a simple disappearance. Someone who needs to believe you're actually dead. You don't know what you're talking about. But Sarah could hear the panic creeping into Karen's voice now. You stole from the wrong people, didn't you? Not just pharmaceutical companies. Worse, something that made you enemies who won't stop looking until they find a body? Shut up. That's why you need the elaborate staging. That's why you need a credible witness. Because whoever you're running from has the resources to investigate your disappearance thoroughly. They'll want proof of death, not just a missing person report. Sarah was moving as she spoke, using the sound of her own voice to mask her movement. As she worked her way along the cliff edge, looking for a different vantage point, if Karen was as desperate as she was beginning to sound, she might make a mistake that Sarah could exploit. Who did you steal from, Karen? Drug cartels. Organized crime. Someone bad enough that federal prison started looking like the safer option. I said shut up. Karen's voice was definitely closer now, and it carried a new edge of hysteria. You don't understand anything about my situation. Sarah reached a point where the cliff curved inward, creating a natural amphitheater in the rock face. From this angle, she could see down into parts of the ravine that had been hidden before. What she saw made her stomach lurch. Karen wasn't trapped in the bottom of the ravine as she'd implied. She was on a series of connected ledges and natural platforms that formed a rough staircase up the cliff face. She was, in fact, only about 20 feet below the main trail, close enough to climb back up without assistance, and she wasn't alone. Two figures in dark clothing were positioned on ledges below Karen, close enough to be providing support but far enough away to avoid being seen from Sarah's original vantage point. They were dressed in tactical gear and carried equipment that definitely wasn't standard hiking supplies. Sarah's blood froze as she realized the true scope of the trap. Karen hadn't been lying about having backup. There really were people involved in this conspiracy, people who looked like they had experience with violence and no qualms about using it. One of the figures looked up and pointed directly at Sarah's position. She'd been spotted. Found her, the man called out, his voice echoing off the rock walls. Karen's laughter drifted up from below, restored to its earlier confidence. I told you she was smart, but not smart enough. Bring her down here, boys. We have work to finish. Sarah ran. She sprinted along the cliff edge, no longer caring about stealth or strategy, focused only on putting distance between herself and the people climbing up from the ravine. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of pursuit boots scraping against rock, equipment jangling, voices coordinating the hunt. The trail ahead curved sharply to the left, following the natural contours of the mountainside. Sarah took the turn at dangerous speed, her boots sliding on loose gravel, and nearly collided with a figure stepping out from behind a cluster of boulders. The man was tall and lean, dressed in the same dark tactical gear as the others. He held something in his hand that might have been a weapon, though Sarah didn't stay still long enough to identify it. She changed direction without breaking stride, leaping off the main trail and plunging into the dense forest that covered the steep slope below. Branches whipped at her face and arms as she crashed through the undergrowth, her heavy pack throwing off her balance and threatening to send her tumbling down the mountainside. Behind her, she could hear multiple pursuers crashing through the forest, their pursuit methodical and coordinated. These weren't random criminals, they were professionals. Sarah's lungs burned as she fought her way through the tangled vegetation, every breath a struggle in the thin mountain air. Her vision